Now, as we travel through these early chapters of Mark, and they're focused in real ways around the Galilee, the momentum builds as great crowds flock to listen to him. Very early on in Mark's gospel, the crowds were so great, they were outside the back door, and wherever he went, they seemed to follow him. And in the passage that I'm going to read to you, in that passage we see how great it was, the pressure upon him. So I'm reading from Mark chapter 3, verse 20 through to 35. Then Jesus entered a house, and again a crowd gathered, so that he and his disciples were not even able to eat. When his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, but they said, "He's out of his mind." And the teachers of the law who came down from Jerusalem said, "He is possessed by Beelzebub, by the prince of demons. He's driving out demons." So Jesus called them over to him and began to speak to them in parables. "How can Satan drive out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. If a house is divided against itself, the house cannot stand. And if Satan opposes himself and is divided, he cannot stand. His end has come. In fact, no one can enter a strong man's house without first tying him up. Then he came plunder the strong man's house. Truly, I tell you, people can be forgiven all their sins and even slander that they utter, but whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit will never be forgiven. They're guilty of an eternal sin." He said this because they were saying he has an impure spirit. Then Jesus' mothers and brothers arrived, standing outside. They sent someone in to call him. A crowd was sitting around him, and they told him, "Your mother and brothers are outside looking for you." "Who are my mother and brothers?" he asked. Then he looked at those seated in the circle around him and said, "Here are my mother and brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother." Well, it's a great passage, but it's a tough one. It would have been so easy to have passed this over and sort of said, "Well, I've missed that one out," and gone on to the next bit. But the truth is that the pressure upon Jesus was so great that he and the disciples couldn't even eat meals in comfort. Both the family of Jesus and the teachers of the law were concerned, though for very different reasons. The teachers made an accusation that Jesus was casting out demons by the prince of demons. Jesus called the critics over. I love this about Jesus. He was prepared to confront those who had the wrong perspective, those who made accusations against him. And he told a parable of a strong man needing to be tied up. His family wanted him restrained, not physically. When they say he's out of his mind, they're not trying to say he's mentally ill. But this is a crazy thing to do, to speak in this way. You're going to be in trouble, Jesus. I can't help but think that there's that aspect to it. For his own good, they want to protect him. Relationships are frayed even with his family for this kind of reason. Perhaps they're saying, if they go for Jesus, they'll come for us as well. Perhaps there's a protectionism going on. Well, let's look at some of the verses in this passage, and at least make some comments about them that I hope might be helpful. In the very beginning of the passage, in verse 20, we recognize the crowd gathering. They must have been following him. They were listening to what he said. As they saw him heal people, as they saw him teach, as they perceived what he was doing, the crowds built. And because they'd been all those maybe 400 years without a prophetic voice, there was something very powerful going on as the crowds were attracted to Jesus. Now, attempts are made to metaphorically tie Jesus up and render him unable to help. You can see how that would have a link to the parable that Jesus told a little later in the story. But then we have this concept, and it's a very real one. A divided house cannot stand. Now, we know that in so many ways in life, that divided families, divided communities, divided people cannot stand by themselves. That truth is there. If a house is divided against itself, the house cannot stand. And then here's the bit that I perhaps wouldn't have wanted to easily move into, but we've got to the unforgivable sin. This almost feels like it's against everything we know about Jesus Christ. It almost feels like so contrary to what we might see. He is the one who forgives sins, who teaches us to forgive other people. But the unforgivable sin is an interesting one. When people have ever come to me when I've been a pastor of a church and said to me, I'm afraid I've committed the unforgivable sin. Well, the first truth, and probably if somebody's bothered about that, they certainly haven't done. The unforgivable sin is about attributing the work of Jesus Christ to evil. That's what the passage is really saying. To say Jesus Christ is doing this out of evil intent. And many people who are not believers, who don't really embrace the Christian faith, would never say that. They say he's a good guy. He does things that's all right. It's saying actually when you contribute and attribute the ministry of Jesus to evil things. Now, I think that really this passage shows us Jesus beginning to address difficult things, beginning to engage with people to such an extent that the pressure's upon him, the crowds are building. This will continue all through Mark's gospel till we get to chapter 8 when the whole mood changes and his direction moves towards the cross. Jesus, somebody who was not afraid to confront what was wrong. Jesus, who had such a popularity that people wanted to be there. And Jesus, who was willing to address the things that other people were too easily ready to pass by.